First of all, I think your analysis was very straight line. History doesn't run in a straight line.
Kid, you cannot tell your neighbor he is stealing ducks when you are stealing frogs.
As High Commissioner, I was wrong. As Charandas Prasad, I reacted naturally how any person would have.
I did not come here for that kind of abuse. I did not come here for that kind of abuse. If you're going to go down that road, I'll walk off.
But it's all okay once they're talking. If they were talking, I could not have been here today.
You got ADHD.
I got that.
Calm down.
I think I've done enough in terms of taking our team out of trouble from losing.
Come on, Lou Taylor. That's good. I'm reading the script now, and the first person that comes to my mind to play a detective,
Yes,
but
the
an
Guyanese
erratic
Mikhail
detective
Rodriguez.
is Mikhail Rodriguez.
Why an African slap an Indian? Why a man and slap a woman? No, Gildarie, you deal with that. You deal with that.
We must encourage platforms like this because it brings together different people and allows for discussions to take place in our country on a multiplicity of fundamental issues.
Gildarie, you apologizing for something you think I did is wrong. I don't want you to do that, and you should not have done that. Welcome to the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon Show. This is a live program that is broadcasted on Guyanese Critic Facebook page, YouTube, and TBN, Daybreak News. Please go to your smartphone or your smart TV, and any one of those three platforms, you will see us right now. We come to you Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8:30. Leonard Gildarie is building a business. So he is right now at the building site, building his booth for the building expo. So he's asked for an excuse. So we will get right into the program now because I'm afraid given the expansive nature of the topics, we will not get in all the sociological angles that we would like to have. There is a consensus around the world in academic think tanks, business magazines, Caribbean governments, and governments around the world that Guyana in the Caribbean and in South America, geographically speaking, is one of the newest oil economy that is doing wonders for Guyana. So the consensus is that Guyana is there for a future based on oil. Now, in Guyana, the talk all the time is about oil and what oil is doing for us. But there are sections of the African Guyanese leadership. I say section because I don't think there's any unanimity or consensus among all the people, the organization, institution that speak for African Guyanese. But there are sections that are saying this oil wealth is not distributed fairly to African Guyanese. The government, of course, is strenuously disputing that. African Guyanese constitute 30% of the population, which makes it a substantial force in Guyanese sociology, culture, politics, and political economy. Now, what is there a consensus among African Guyanese that they are not benefiting from the oil? Well, this evening, we have two prominent African Guyanese. I don't need to elaborate on their designations because they have been around a long, long time and they can pronounce on the different angles of the African existence in Guyana. But for protocol's sake, they are the Minister of Labour, Joseph Hamilton, GCOM Commissioner and EPADG Head, Vincent Alexander. They're here in their capacity tonight to discuss African issues, and particularly the claim by some African Guyanese organizations that African Guyanese are not benefiting. I repeat, that is their claim. We will hear tonight from both gentlemen if these claims are legitimate or if these claims are fictional. We will start on a light note, the usual protocol. Joseph Hamilton. Joe, welcome to the program.
Freddie, pleasure to be here as always.
Vincent, thanks. We're going to start on a light note and then go into the fire. So my first question, we go alphabetically, of course, on this program, Mr. Vincent Alexander. Vincent, where were you on Emancipation Day and what were you doing?
On Emancipation Day, I happened to have been in Bartica, and I was using the opportunity to share with the people of Bartica an exhibition we have relating to African civilization and the state of African Guyanese.
Who's we?
EPADG.
Oh, EPADG. Joe, where you were on Emancipation?
I was invited by the people of Denham still to come celebrate with them Emancipation Day, so I went on the west side, as they say.
So both of you participated meaningfully in what African people in Bartica and Denham still were doing.
For me, as a yearly feature, wherever you're invited across the country, you go and celebrate.
Okay, so from that light note, let's move into the fire. Vincent, is there any argument that could be advanced based on a forum, an organization named Coffee 250 sponsored, called the State of the African Guyanese Economy? There were claims made at that forum that African Guyanese are not benefiting from the oil wealth. Do you embrace that partially? Do you embrace that statement holistically? Or do you think the statement is debatable?
It is unquestionable that African Guyanese are not involved in the oil industry in terms of the ownership of almost any of the services that are being provided to that industry, as much as they're not involved at all in the ownership of the core element of the industry. Nobody can contest that. That's a fact.
Joseph Hamilton, can that be contested?
Well, the thing is,
that factual?
Look, oil and gas is here with us, but we cannot disassociate the new sector from the country that existed. And in this conversation about the state of African Guyanese, Afro-Guyanese, look, a couple of things we have to say. One, all of us are responsible for our future and our development, regardless what race we belong to. That's the first point. The second issue, all of us are responsible for the children we bring into this world, to ensure that they have a seat and a place at the table. If you look at the oil and gas sector, based on what Vincent has just said, and that is can be contested, because of how this sector is, it is the persons who had wealth who can invest in the sector, and that is the issue. So it is not that, in my view, people are favored. It is whether the services, more so the services, any other investment. If you look at what is happening at the front of the river there, the investors are persons who had money to invest. So it is not that there isn't a place for African Guyanese, but the issue is you have to have the type of financing to get involved, to participate, and to even companies that you have to take it to a level where you can participate and you can bid for as a subcontractor in oil and gas, because they have all kind of stipulations that a lot of companies in this country are yet to reach those stipulations to participate in oil and gas. So that is it has a context. This discussion got to be developed. But the oil and gas is with us 2015, production is 2019. Whilst I say that, the majority of persons who are working in oil and gas are Afro-Guyanese. And that cannot be contested. So African Guyanese are participating in the oil and gas sector, but not prominently as owners of company, not prominently as subcontractors.
Do you want to respond to that before we move on?
No, what has been said, it's factual that what I've said has not really been contested. So indeed it is that we are not at the table in terms of ownership of the services and in terms of ownership of the very operation itself. Undoubtedly, there are African Guyanese who are involved in the sector as employees. And one may well argue that again, exemplifies African Guyanese as probably being at the bottom of the ladder.
Before we move on.
The thing is, look, and that is one of the things with all my good friends who purport to speak on behalf of African Guyanese. When that is said, for me, something else must be said. How you move from point A to point B. How do you ensure that all the people who say they speak on behalf of us, to ensure that African Guyanese can move to this place where the type of financing that they desire and need to develop their business, how they can get it, where they can get it, how the persons who have assigned themselves, the persons who speak on our behalf, how they can help them to get there. And that is what is missing from the conversation of all the African Guyanese leaders who present themselves to say they're speaking on our behalf. And in a lot of instances, or mostly, we have not authorized them to speak on our behalf, but they have taken on that mantle, as they see it, and they say they speak on our behalf. But what they're doing is just speaking about the problem that exists. Solutions is not coming to remedy the identified problem. There's no solution on the table. So I would want to hear from Vincent our solutions. How do we move from, I'm sure he would, and he has started to make the point about how African Guyanese are not involved, and there is only one sector. How do you help them to get involved? That is the other conversation, and that's missing from this conversation about how you will take African Guyanese upward in any sector. And that is what I go on to here.
I don't have to ask the question. He asked the question.
Well, first of all, let me say this whole question of representation of African Guyanese. I don't purport to represent African Guyanese. I have been elected to be the chairperson of IPADG, an organization which consists of 65 African Guyanese organizations. And insofar as I have been elected, I am an authentic and legitimate representative of that organization and what that organization represents. It represents a conglomeration of 65 African Guyanese organizations. So I don't have to purport anything. What is in this circumstance. I recognize that indeed the problem, though we have started to discuss the question of oil and gas specifically, the problem that we really are confronted with is not a problem peculiar to oil and gas. It's a problem in relation to the African Guyanese on the landscape, the political and economic landscape of Guyana, and African Guyanese involvement in industry and business in Guyana. I agree that that is the problem that one has to confront. And in fact, that problem exists is one of the reasons why a decade for the people of African descent was declared by the United Nations. I think the world at large has come to a recognition that not only in Guyana, but in the African diaspora, to a very large extent, the people of African descent have found themselves in a position that is disadvantageous relatively to other peoples, or disadvantageous in terms of what is ideally required or looked for. So therein lies the problem, not oil and gas per se. Oil and gas is just a manifestation of the inherent problem. And that problem, to a very large extent, is associated with the historical evolution of the society, the way in which the society has evolved, the way in which the economy has evolved. That is where the problem is, and that is where one has to look for solutions. But in looking for solutions, one has to recognize that though the problem is largely centered on the economy, that solutions are largely driven by the framework within which these things are approached, and that framework is largely a legal framework, largely an institutional framework, and largely a political framework. And so the question has to be asked, what is it about the institutional, legal, and political framework that has left the people of African descent in a disadvantageous position? And therefore, one has to look to the history of the country to understand how this has occurred. In the first instance, the people of African descent are not in Guyana of their own free will. I mean, those of us who are here now have a choice, so you can say. But initially, the people of African descent did not come here of their own free will. Not only did they not come here of their own free will, but when they came here, they were not treated as human beings. They were treated as property, as chattel. And so for over 200 years, the people of African descent worked in this country to build industry, largely the sugar industry in the last instance. It didn't start with sugar, but largely the sugar industry in the last instance. And also worked to build the infrastructure of this country, particularly on the coastal belt. And can civilization of swampy Guyana can be contributed to the people of African descent. But there was no benefit they derived from that. Absolutely no benefit they derived from that. In fact, it was quite the opposite. They were dehumanized during the course of that process. So we come to a point where, after tremendous struggle, the people of African descent were able to free themselves from enslavement into an environment where they should be able to make choices. What one has to immediately observe is that they go into that environment in a disadvantage. Because basically for 200 years they've not been able to accumulate and to bring into that environment the kind of capital and the kind of wealth. And in some regards, even the kind of human resource, in some regards, the kind of human resource required for economic and social mobility. They exhibited, however, the capacity to address the problem. And for the period of apprenticeship, they were able to muster, to save significant sums, and as a consequence, to buy villages. This is probably the largest enterprise of that sort that ever took place in the world. The effort of the people of African descent to purchase villages. But two things happened at that point in time. On one hand, this economy was manipulated in a manner that deprived them of the opportunity of bargaining for wages if they continue to work on the estates. And that manipulation had to do with the importation of labor to suppress the value and the salaries associated with labor. On the other hand, in their villages, all sorts of actions were taken inimical to the growth and development of those villages. We know about the flooding of the villages that made agriculture very difficult. We also know that there were other burdens imposed upon the people of African descent in those villages in the forms of all sorts of taxes. If they had a dray card, they had to pay tax. Everything. So they were suppressed and oppressed, even though they had been relieved of the physical enslavement. Now, the consequence of what I'm referring to has two particular areas that one would have to look at. They were affected materially by virtue of that. But not only were they affected materially, they were also affected psychologically. These experiences are the experiences that were beyond their control in most regards, that fashioned not only their physical state in this country, but their psychological state. A psychological state which partly saw them come into the urban areas, whether commuting or removing their livelihoods from the villages to the urban areas to seek jobs as a form of stability in the face of the instability that they were faced with in the villages in their attempt to eke out a living and to build an economy. Now I say that because that's a psychological moment. They were involved in enterprise at the inception, and they were suppressed and oppressed in their attempt to become involved in enterprise, which led to them shifting into being wage earners. And that's a psychological moment in relation to how do we treat enterprise hereafter? How do we treat agriculture that we have been forced out of? Given the fact that agriculture is also associated, for them, with the history of slavery. And so we see that there's a psychological and material being emerging in an environment that has not been conducive to their natural growth, their natural development, has not been conducive to them deploying their skills. And so they are boxed in two ways in terms of what's there for the taking. You know, for example, the African Guyanese were denied the opportunity to be involved in trading. They were denied license to trade, whilst the Portuguese Guyanese were given those licenses to trade. So the institutional and the legal framework, which was largely determined by the political framework, tremendously disadvantaged and fashioned not only the then but the future of African Guyanese. And one can only address this problem from the standpoint of the same institutional, legal, and political frameworks. And that is what has not occurred. And that is exactly what the decade has been established with in mind. Because when one looks at the decade and what the objectives are, it speaks specifically the institutional and legal frameworks that ought to be addressed to provide the people of African descent with the opportunities that they had not been provided with, to relieve them of the deprivation that they had been subjected to. That is what the decade seeks to do when one looks at what these objectives are all about. And so there is where the problem has got to be addressed.
There's a couple of things. One, I heard Vincent. I allowed Vincent to speak. Take us back.
But that's a historical narrative. They've come to mind.
I allowed him to.
I have a psychological moment when Joe tells me, allow me to speak. You asked me to speak, I spoke.
I'm saying I didn't interject.
Well, that's different. But allow me.
Yes,
I agree.
But I don't think he meant it.
No, these are important psychological relational moments.
I didn't interject because I wanted him to speak. And all the things you said. Look.
And he spoke effusively.
Yes.
So it's your turn.
And he stopped at a place where real solutions, and that is the point that I was making earlier.
You have interjected. I didn't finish. So don't stop at the point of solution.
The other point is...
Do not say that because you interjected. And you probably it's right at this time to speak, but to say that I haven't gotten the solutions, but I did not conclude what I was saying.
We will come to that. But it was a long, a long offering.
Let it be understood.
It was a long offering.
I have not sought not to present solutions.
Okay.
The point in the conversation, after I have laid my groundwork, Mr. Hamilton has sought to speak.
But if we allowed,
that's not the issue.
No, but if you had went on, the program would have drifted.
Not questioning
we're coming back to
that. Is why
we will come back to that.
That is why
that was a very long.
I accept his right to speak, but I don't accept his contention that I have not presented solutions.
We come to that.
I don't accept the contention.
The program,
but that was a long historical narrative
I'm not questioning
of which others, and I think particularly people like Ravidev would argue that there are certain loopholes in that, especially.
Undoubtedly, people will want to argue that.
But before
one of the loopholes is not the absence of solutions.
But before you
that's the only point I'm
you painted a long picture that sounds deterministic, that these people historically have been in this condition. Let me offer Joe the opportunity to
look. You know, I heard, I read, I knew, but the articulation of Vincent and so many others. When you listen, apparently they're suggesting that we are incapable. Recognizing all the historical baggage, we are incapable even when given opportunities to come out of this place. You follow me? This psychological place that he just spoke about.
Actually, psychological determination.
I have a different view. My view is that we are not incapable. And that is the reason why when I started, I started with our responsibility as a person. What is your responsibility as a person, as an adult here? You have a responsibility to help yourself to move from point A to point B. When we were growing up in the country, old people used to say, what will take you out of this place, this poverty, is education, education, education. So identifying that we have a responsibility first to ourselves. And secondly, we have a responsibility to the children that we bring into this world. And many of the issues to be dealt with, the African Guyanese, I'm saying boldly, we have to take on that responsibility and we have to take it on boldly. We can't shirk from it and seek to suggest that it's somebody else's responsibility. Some people seek to suggest it's a government responsibility. The government, yes, got a responsibility to support, and not just one ethnic group. That's the other point. The other thing, too, is this, and again, the people who say they speak on behalf of us. On one hand, they preach African unity, but I want to show the hypocrisy of that conversation.
Strong word.
Yes. African unity for them means only people who have a relationship with the PNC. Any person of African descent who supports or have a relationship with the PPP Civic. That's the reality of the situation. They're ostracized. They are no more counted. And those are the facts.
You're not talking about it, Padaji.
Well,
you're not talking about it.
The point is, I don't know if Padaji has any person who is a supporter of the PPP Civic. I don't know. If you know, tell us tonight.
You're not talking about it, Padaji.
I am saying.
I don't care. I don't know. I don't care.
I'm saying.
And Padaji is open to any Guyanese.
Am saying, Freddie.
So that nonsense that you're talking about.
This is crap. I am saying the leadership, the black leadership in this country, in all the organizations, whichever one they be, they stop recognizing any African Guyanese who is a supporter and is aligned to the PPP Civic. It is suggested in their head somehow that we don't have anything to bring to the table. You follow me? Because we have sold out the tribe. And therefore, some of the solutions that they seek, the same persons who they ostracize, might have solutions to help. But you're not recognized anymore. And that's the reality. That's the reality here. And Vincent is very much aware. He might not have uttered those things.
I refuse to accept that where I sit, in the organization I represent, that there is any element of truth in what Mr. Hamilton is saying. I don't have the problem Mr. Hamilton has. Padaji is an organization that was formed and opened up to itself to the involvement of any and every African Guyanese. Padaji, as the PPP, because this is where we are going now, has attempted to say, it's not a political organization in the sense that they are competing with the PPP and they're representing people of African descent who are PNC. Any person of African descent can and have joined Padaji, and what we are concerned about is the state of the people of African descent, rather than their political allegiance.
You don't think I am concerned about the state of the people?
I'm not questioning what you're concerned about. I haven't questioned that.
That is the point.
You have questioned.
That's the point. Where they have assumed this responsibility only. And for us,
nobody stopped you from joining,
right?
Nobody stopped you from joining.
It's not about joining. It's not about joining something. It's about representation and doing daily.
There is no evidence that we have done anything
African
that does not represent African Guyanese.
I am saying.
Of all political persuasions.
I am saying this. Look, I'm saying this. Look. Every day, there are persons who are not spokespersons for African Guyanese organization who do daily and give service to African Guyanese.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong. Right? What's the issue?
The issue is...
That's not an issue.
Yes, it's an issue.
It's not an issue.
The issue is, and listen to me. You listen to all the leadership of the black groups around. They ostracize you cannot.
Where is this evidence? Where is this evidence? Where is the evidence?
The evidence
What's
is
the evidence?
The evidence is the name calling. The evidence is what is
name
said.
calling? What did Paddy G
Oh my!
name is Paddy G
You
called?
only dealing with. I'm not dealing with.
I'm representing the Paddy G.
No, that's
and
what
you
came
are
here
talking about.
I am talking in general sense.
To this audience,
Freddie, you're not going to narrow my conversation, Vincent.
At the head of it, Paddy.
You're not going to narrow my conversation. I am speaking.
You are accusing everybody.
Yes, I am.
And I am defending the Paddy G.
Yeah, I am because I
am
have
defending the Paddy G. The others are not here to defend
I have
themselves.
listened to the articulation. And I know enough.
Speak out as Paddy G.
I know enough. You're not going to narrow me to your organization. I am making.
The others are not here to defend themselves.
The others
Who
every
you
day,
are referring to.
every day they speak.
And you're trying.
And every day, what they
trying
do.
to say that what you're saying applies to all African organizations.
Well,
and I am saying it doesn't apply to Paddy G.
Well,
and you can't show it applies to Paddy G.
Sure, you don't have the evidence that you don't apply. You're attempting
You
to.
have no. You are making the accusation, so you got to prove it.
I am saying, Freddie.
You have to prove
I am saying, look, these guys on one hand, I'm repeating, they talk about African Guyanese unity. But that for them only means African Guyanese who are supporters of the People's National Congress. It don't mean African Guyanese who are supporters of the PPP Civic. It suggests that
you are purporting to speak for
we don't have anything to bring to the table. And they present themselves like it is only them and them alone who deal with African Guyanese problems daily and bring resolution and solution to them. And I'm saying they don't have ownership of that.
Nobody's claiming ownership of that.
Yes, you all present yourself like only you all got ownership.
We represent the people
but I am saying
who have elected us.
They're African Guyanese who are not part of any one of these groups who every day
Nothing's wrong with that.
Do much more than you all.
Well, the much more is not a problem.
Much more than you all. Every day they give service.
There's nothing wrong with that. Where's the evidence of this?
The other issue I'm coming back to, we cannot have a conversation as African Guyanese whereby we don't bring to the fore responsibility.
So what's the issue of responsibility you're talking about?
The issue of responsibility, I have said.
You're accusing all the African guys not to be responsible.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I couldn't say that. I know you good enough that you're a responsible father. I know myself good enough. I couldn't be saying that.
Thank you.
I am saying that we cannot have a conversation that first, as a ethnic group, we don't take responsibility for our actions. What we do, how we see ourselves developing in this country. Secondly, what we do for and about our children. Those things, we have to talk about them boldly. There's another thing that I have heard several leaders here, that African Guyanese issues should not be the concern of any other ethnic group. Baloney. The other ethnic group, they live in this society. And if your action...
You're contradicting yourself.
No. And you think
said early on that the state, we want the state to help us.
No, I'm getting to the state. I'm getting to the state.
You're saying that?
No, I'm getting to the state. I am making a point. No, I'm not contradicting myself.
You are.
I'm saying that the conversation is that no other ethnic group must have a concern or must speak about any issue that is in the African Guyanese community.
That's your view.
I heard one of your guests said that not so long ago. Mr. David Ann said that here several times on this program. And I'm saying, if specifically when we were speaking with about Gita Chandan, he made that point pellucidly that she has no right, even though the action might negatively impact her and our ethnic group. So
I can't. I don't know what he's talking about. So I can't come.
Oh, you're right. You don't know what I'm talking about.
What you're talking about?
You cannot be in a society where you have several ethnic
You can't
groups.
bring one example.
And you take the position.
And make that the African.
You
Guyanese
take the
community.
position. No.
If what you're saying is true,
what I'm saying is very much true.
I can't speak
very much
because
very much
everything has to be contextualized.
Vincent, listen.
I can't contextualize.
Vincent, listen.
So I can't talk to that.
You have to.
But you
listen.
can't bring me some example of
the first thing has to happen.
African Guyanese are responsible.
The first thing has to happen. Vincent, I could not be saying all African Guyanese. I am trying to say that as a group.
Which group are you talking about?
I'm talking the African Guyanese in Guyana. I am saying we have to have a conversation that speaks to responsibility. How the responsibility, firstly, of ourselves, the responsibility as parents, the responsibility
So
to
you're
ourselves.
saying no African Guyanese
I
organization
could
does
not be saying
that?
that.
Ask the question. Are you saying no African Guyanese organization
The
does
point is, I don't know what African Guyanese really are doing. I don't know.
That's the best thing you said tonight. For tonight.
I don't know. Because I have not seen the, I have not seen the evidence of what they have done.
That's the most accurate thing you've said.
I have not seen the evidence of what they have done. What is the evidence? Show me the evidence.
I have been doing these programs since the 90s. And that's a long time. And this is the first program that I have done, the first interview I've done, in which I have no space And
well, you have a space now.
It's the first interview in which I didn't get any time to get in.
It's not over.
I didn't get any time to get in. But I think all our viewers will agree, and I certainly agree, it is in fact dynamic, interesting, and I think intellectually well shaped. So if I could get in now and we could cool it down, and
it was never hard, Freddie. Trust me.
Okay,
you get in.
There was one thing I heard you say, and I don't know if I misinterpreted you. I think you said to him, "You purporting to speak for black people."
I didn't.
Did you
say
say
that?
You didn't say that.
No. I said.
I think he asked you that, but you were busy talking.
I said.
No, I just want to know.
Yeah, something like that, Vincent. But you don't pay attention to that.
Didn't you say something? I think in this heat, I think you said. So you purporting to speak for black people?
There was the contention initially by Mr. Hamilton that these leaders purport to speak.
Let's take it Joe and Vincent. Joe said.
And I refuted that.
That he represented all.
I may have raised the question.
Yeah.
Asking him if he purports to speak for all black people.
No, I don't. I don't. My problem is that
but he was saying that too. You know that some of these African groups don't purport to.
My problem is that many of the people, Freddie, they attempt to speak on my behalf, and I didn't consent for them to speak on my behalf.
I don't know how you got that.
Many of the things they say on behalf of me, I'm not aligned with that.
You're free to say where you are.
No, that's why I'm speaking here.
But they have to speak. When one speaks as a leader, one is not speaking to a specific individual. One is speaking to what may be the dominant factor at play. That dominant factor might not relate to one or the other person.
Bring some solution. Right? The people waiting to hear you.
But you cut me earlier.
No. Tell me.
But you cut me. But he had to cut you. If he didn't cut you, went 15
minutes, man. You would have to say me
15 minutes. Don't talk.
I want to get in a question to both of you.
Bring some solutions.
No. We'll come to that. Based on Vincent's long delivery.
Yes.
Vincent, I'm asking you this question, which I will direct to Joe too. You give, I would think, a narrative that a historian would be indecent to disagree with. The way the hardship they face, etc. And it was a historical picture you painted. In fact, you went on. And I think any historian, I did my first degree in history at UG, won the best prize for the paper in Guyanese history. I don't think anybody would, when they listen to you, would just reject that. But it has a deterministic flair to it. For example, all that African Guyanese went through, wrongly, of course, but it cannot be systematic. For example, after independence, purportedly a majority African organization took hold of the state in 1968. And some of those, you talk about the legal, political, some of those frameworks that you said have to be considered in the economic liberation of Guyanese. Didn't that happen after 1966? I'm asking you, and then the same question to him.
My response to that would be that indeed, after independence, there were attempts and there were instances where the institutional framework and the legal frameworks were addressed. Two things about that. One, they were not addressed in totality. So we still have remnants of the old institutional and legal frameworks that have to be addressed. That's one. So that's the first point I want to make. They were not addressed in totality.
Remember totality.
They were not addressed in totality.
Remember, that's very important.
And secondly, even in the instance where those frameworks are addressed contemporarily, unless one applies equitable solutions to the problem, equitable solutions, merely addressing something today that changes the goalposts without equitable policies to ensure that people can come to that new goalpost does not necessarily solve the problem. And so one of the problems is that even in the instances where laws may have been changed, institutional framework may have been changed, the disadvantaged person is not necessarily in the position to take advantage of the changes if there isn't some equitable process that brings him or her to the table. Now, Joe spoke earlier about African Guyanese not being involved in A, B, C, or G, spoke about that. And therefore, one has to ask the question, even if there is the possibility, what is the level of probability given where the person is positioned comparatively in a competitive environment? If you don't have the resources, as Joe said, to get involved in oil and gas, that's a reality. So saying now that anybody could get involved in oil and gas, which probably is a difference to when you said African Guyanese go and get licensed to trade. So they can get licensed not to get involved in oil and gas. But where are they in terms of the material resources? Given the fact that the deprivation of the centuries has placed them in that position where they don't have the material resources. And therefore, when one talks about a solution, it's not only a question of, at the present time, changing the conditions. It's also a question of addressing, when you change those conditions, where the people who are the benefit from the changes are in relation to what the new conditions require of them. And that's another deficiency.
Before you come in, Joe, when I listen to that, what's the answer? I would like to hear the answer from Vincent, but what's your answer to that?
No, look.
What are you asking for, Vincent?
Okay.
I'm ready to speak about that too.
Look. I said, look, if you, most African Guyanese leaders, they believe that the people who can represent their interests best, I'm talking now at the political level, is people that are looking like them, right? And you just made the point that from 68 to 92, 64 to 92, a political entity that the leadership is predominantly African Guyanese. The question is, recognizing all that Vincent has said, what did they do to remedy it? He has just explained some of the things, why it could not be remedied.
He didn't explain why it could not be, just said it was not done.
It was not done. Nobody gave some
said,
justification. Right.
I would like to see why after 1966 it could be done.
Let me come present day. Again, with all the things that were deficient, a predominant political entity, African Guyanese, was in power from 2015 to 2020. I'm coming now. Forget about thing.
Forget about 1966.
Right. Let us do and analyze what happened, what they did. The same people now will speak rambunctiously about what the present government should do for African Guyana. They were, just the other day, they were in power for 5 years.
3 years ago, man.
3 years ago, they were in power for 5 years. Before 2015, they knew all of these things, you know. They preached it, they proclaimed it, they went on the platform and they spoke about these deficiencies and that Vincent identified. But when given political authority and state authority to remedy, they did their worst stuff. Juxtapose that in 3 years. What has happened in the African Guyanese community in 3 years? These people who said they're the champions of African Guyanese, they couldn't do it. There's nothing that they can, nothing you can put your hand on that under the APNO FC government, the great historian, and he could tell you about many of the things Vincent just talked about, all the African struggles in the villages and whatever.
Yes,
and so
he edited the book on that.
That's the point. He had all that information. And 5 years as president, executive president of this country, what did he do to remedy any of these matters that he identified that needs to be remedied? And that is my problem I have. That is a problem. The same persons who can articulate all of this, what should be done, when given the authority to do it, they fall flat on their face. And the second point is, all the articulation, concrete proposals of how the matter is dealt with. I am proposing, I am saying, one of the things, we cannot shy away from taking responsibility. Cannot. And a lot of times when the conversation is articulated in a way whereby we don't have any responsibility in this matter.
I don't know that you can articulate that.
And I'm saying
that's your thought.
Yeah,
that's your thought.
This is not our responsibility, somebody else's own.
I don't know who's articulated that.
No. I have heard many so-called leaders of Africa, they think it's the government's responsibility to remedy the African Guyanese problem. The government is to help and to support it and to put things in place. But we have a responsibility. All ethnic groups, they have a responsibility.
I don't question the thing of ethnic groups having a responsibility. But undoubtedly, given the way things have been, and my contention that at the crux of the matter is institutional, legal, and other frameworks. I'm not saying the government, because I'm not here juxtaposing the PNC to the PPP.
Well, I am.
I'm not doing that.
I am. I have to do it.
I'm not doing that.
I have to do it because the same people
I am not doing that.
who know all what to be done, they had the opportunity to do it.
I'm not juxtaposing
and they did
the PNC
nothing.
to the PPP.
I have to do that. Sorry.
But the extent to which those frameworks are required to be dealt with is the extent to which the state, I'm not talking about the government.
Yeah, the state.
The state has
the state run by David Granger
has a responsibility.
What did he do?
Right? The state has a responsibility. Now, this argument about trying to get me into an argument about what Granger is supposed to be the PPP done, I'm not
trying to get you into argument.
Suffice to say this.
I'm not trying to get you.
Suffice to say this.
I'm speaking.
This zero-sum Granger argument.
Yeah, there's what it is.
Granger put in place
What?
in a number of African villages a project called the RAID project.
What project?
What project?
The RAID.
What is it? Only you know.
RAID?
Only you know that.
The RAID project.
I was a member of Parliament.
That's an acronym. What is
In that
I
project,
don't know what you're talking about. Only Vincent alone know about that.
Moka Arcadia,
Yes.
BV Triumph,
Yeah.
Boxer and Itika.
Yes.
There was a project where
That's what his name?
work was being done. You know about it.
It failed. If that's what I don't know
work
what
was
his name
being
is.
done.
I know that some money was passed by IDB funds. Total failure. The project failed.
Do you remember what RAID stands for?
I don't remember the acronym.
He even can't remember.
That's not
what it stands
important.
for. The point I'm making, Freddie,
project was
he's speaking
intended
about a
and
failed project.
The
on the
project
Granger.
did not fail on the Granger.
Okay.
The project was ongoing when the government changed. And one of the things the PEP government
Vincent, the project failed. I belong to
government did.
Man's my village. It failed before
One
even.
of the
Don't
things
blame
the PEP
PEP.
government did, there was an understanding as a part of the project was that when the works were completed,
You cut in. What RAID did in these 4 villages? What they set
it
out
was
to do?
essentially to go into the farmlands and to rehabilitate the farmlands. So the people could be involved.
Freddie, the
in
project
agriculture.
failed. I belong to Better Fact
Right?
Triumph.
People could be
Before
involved
the
in
PEP
agriculture.
took power in 2020, the project failed, don't Vincent?
The project had not failed, and what the PEP did, they came into government and they undermined the continuation of the project because a
failed
part
project.
of what the project was supposed to do
Yeah, it was what?
was to leave the equipment in the communities under community control for the continuous maintenance
there was no
of the
equipment.
project. There was equipment. You all removed the equipment.
I better watch and try.
You all removed the equipment. From Moka Arcadia, they removed the equipment. From Moka Arcadia, they removed the equipment.
Freddie, hear the story. Now he's telling me about the project. I know that.
First of all, you said they had no project.
No, I
said
didn't say
Granger
that.
did nothing.
You said RAID. I don't know what the hell you were talking about. I know that
You certainly weren't a good parliamentarian not to know that.
That Winston Jordan came to the parliament and he outlined that these 4 villages, so much $100 they will get to do agricultural development. With all that fanfare, even before the PV, that was presented maybe this first year or second year with Apnu in government. Even before the PV in 2020, the project failed.
I contest that.
You could contest how much you want.
I contest that.
I belong to
and I argue what the PEP did
one of the
was
villages,
to remove the equipment.
One of the villages was my village.
Remove the equipment.
And you go to the people in Bedford and Triumph today. The project failed long before
The project
2020.
never failed.
So
The project has been stymied by the PEP.
And we weren't in government.
Because you came in, the project was ongoing.
Anyhow.
What the PEP have essentially done
Yes, what?
is where the APNU were doing things, they came in and they brought those things to an end.
Buxton, we brought Buxton. The development we have done, the development PP we have done in Buxton.
They have not provided
What are you
the
saying?
equipment. They have in fact withdrawn the equipment.
What are you saying?
From Moka Arcadia, the equipment was withdrawn for the maintenance of an ongoing project. That's beyond dispute.
The operator.
So to tell me that Granger did nothing, you know, this is a fallacy.
What
it's a fallacy.
You go and ask any African Guyanese person or community what David Granger, the great historian, did for their community.
It's a fallacy.
You go and ask them.
It's a fallacy.
It's a fallacy. Where he did something, Georgetown. What did he do
For example,
Vincent, yes, what else? Give us some fallacy and fiction.
For example,
what Granger did for black people.
When Granger introduced the whole idea
of what?
Of transportation for school children, right? What he did, and we're talking about solutions, what he did was to provide an opportunity for people who could not commute to go to school to be able to commute and therefore to increase the percentage of children the children should care for who can attend schools.
Vincent, you're snatching rabbits out of the hat.
You see any, to both of you, you see any of these improvements being done by the
I have said
have you seen any
unequivocally.
transportation for school children?
I am seeing
Have you seen
improvement. In 3 years, Freddie, I am seeing improvements. Hundreds of roads.
No roads were done in Grange this time.
roads were done in Grange this time. I am saying you can't compare whatever.
No roads were done. You said nothing.
Houses, house lot. I am seeing improvement in African Guyanese community. That did not happen in 5 years of a predominantly.
That never happened.
That government.
That never happened.
Anyhow.
But this thing about transportation for school children, aren't we seeing that under Ali presidency?
I don't know if this is continued.
The transportation for...
I don't know that it's continued.
You don't know anything about the PPP.
I don't know if it's
He can
continued.
tell you what the failed government did, but he can't tell you about a government that is doing
No,
what we do.
I didn't come talk about government, you know. I was not juxtaposing governments.
We have to bring government.
I was not
into play.
juxtaposing
You're
government.
trying to be
I am
smart.
saying that
You're
there
trying to be
are
smart
things
by saying
irrespective, because my argument
you're trying to be smart to
in
say the
terms
state.
of what is it? It is the state.
You're trying to
It is the
escape
state.
culpability
It is the state.
by throwing the state out there and
is the
leave
state.
it. I'm trying to deal with who is in government at what
It's the
time and
state.
what did they do.
Vincent, Joe, I'm not going to say Mr. Alexander and Hamilton. I know you guys too long, and I think you mean well. Could we have, there's a lot of questions that haven't been able to ask. I wanted you to come back, being Vincent Alexander, not Ipadaji, and he being Joe Hamilton, not the minister. And I want you to assess the roles of different institutions. I want to hear from you a holistic intellectual analysis of the PPP, and I'd like to hear his philosophical. No, in another debate in a month's time. So
I have no problem with that.
Would we come and, because so many questions I had on the table. Both of you have unceremoniously expelled me from my own program. I didn't get in anything at all.
That kind of conversation, I would have an opportunity to ensure that Vincent then use the state. You would have to speak about the government.
I have no problem.
Operator just said 2 minutes overtime. Vincent, Joe, all the questions that we didn't get through, I want, as I said before, could we do this in 6 weeks' time? Do I have a commitment?
I have no problem with that.
Vincent? Joe,
Freddie,
this was the only program in which the guests kicked me off my own program. You were looking at the Gildarie Freddie Kissoon show, and Joe Hamilton and Vincent Alexander debating the African existence in Guyana. Thanks for watching us. We'll see you Friday. Take care. Bye-bye.